There are at least 14 canceled Crash games, coming from developers like Mark Cerny, Traveler's Tales, Magenta Software, Big Red Button, and more. Find out about all of them in every canceled Crash game. Game Facts Special: Crash Bandicoot Worlds. The working title for a game that was early in its development in 2009. The only surviving assets we have are sketches of the proposed title screen. Game designer Mark Cerny also gave us an account of his first-hand experience in fleshing out this canceled title. Mark stated that open-world exploration would have been the main feature that would separate it from the classic linear Rails type of gameplay in the original trilogy of Crash games. The game was eventually halted due to Universal Interactive's indecision on the direction for the next Crash game, the first without Naughty Dog. Universal was reportedly cautious about sending the development of Crash to a new studio, and scrapped the idea of open-world gameplay in order to stay true to the formula. Deteriorating relationships between Mark Cerny, Sony, and Universal were also rumored to be a cause. Eventually, the developer Traveler's Tales hastily turned the game into that traditional Crash outing with Wrath of Cortex for the PS2, and without Mark Cerny. Traveler's Tales had only been given 12 months to develop this game. Traveler's Tales would get to develop an open-world game eventually with the next game, Crash Twinsanity. Crash Evolution. Did you know that Crash Twinsanity, the first dive into open-world gameplay for the Crash series, is actually a reimagining of a canceled game called Crash Evolution? Evolution's original concepts are very different to what it would become. The canceled game would have combined the classic platforming in a science fiction setting, while even incorporating RPG elements. But Crash Evolution's original gameplay and story were largely scrapped, due to the premise being similar to 2002's Ratchet & Clank. This meant that they had to change much of the planned setting, like leaning further into the cartoonish, comedic style of classic Crash, dropping the more serious tone they were going for. Crash Nitro Kart, Traveler's Tales version. Traveler's Tales in 2001 began working on a racing game for the Crash series. Eventually, it was handed to Vicarious Visions to complete, but there are numerous changes that happened once this deal went through. For example, the character Nina Cortex was originally going to debut in the Traveler's Tales version, but TT withheld the character from Vicarious Visions so that they could debut her in their own game in the future. The concept art for Nina and her kart displays quite a different art direction than what we actually got with the release. Cortex Chaos, also known as the all-new Cortex Show. This game had been pitched a few times by Traveler's Tales' Oxford studio after Twinsanity released. Keith Webb, a concept artist, most notably for his work on Twinsanity, told community fan site Crash Mania about a few of these proposals that he worked on. Keith said that one proposal would feature Cortex in a Pikmin-style game, where he would control a multitude of small clones to perform communal tasks. A second concept was a take on the Mega Man style of game. In this proposal, Cortex is rejected from his communal group of evil scientists. He then has to fight his way back through platforming and run-and-gun style gameplay. Keith even mentioned that a third concept would involve Nina, but couldn't recall much of that one. Each of these proposals has a piece of concept art by Keith attached to it. He suggested that the final design, if it went ahead, would likely have involved elements from each of the proposals in one way or another. Sounds chaotic. Crash Bandicoot, Crash's evil twin. Crash Bandicoot could have gotten his own game in this 2004 proposal by Magenta Software. The pitch involved war propaganda related concept art, with Cortex recruiting soldiers. He would have also retained his rightful position as the main antagonist. Crush, the player character, was designed to be able to drive vehicles to explore a sci-fi themed open world. One environment was created to test the game before Sony Computer Entertainment would decline their pitch. Crash Mania reports Andy J. Davis as one of the lead artists at the time, and thanks him for revealing this information. Along with this, concept art and screenshots of the prototypes were made publicly available. Crash Clash Racing. Once more, after the release of Crash Twinsanity, Traveler's Tales' Oxford studio began working on yet another Crash Racing title. Its concept based itself within Crash Bandicoot's imagination. Racetracks were based on his dream dreams and thoughts. Paul Gardner was a writer and designer for Twinsanity. He said that despite the racing game concept, the development plan was to actually have the game be a direct continuation from the story of Twinsanity. It featured personalized cars, with a fusion mechanic that would later be utilized in Crash Tag Team Racing by Radical Entertainment. It seems like TT just couldn't catch their break with a Crash racing game. Crash Tag Team Racing, Nintendo DS. The studio, Sensory Sweep Entertainment, did a lot of work on Nintendo handhelds like the DS and Game Boy Advance. In 2005, they were working on a Nintendo DS version of Crash Tag Team Racing. However, unlike the PlayStation Portable's port of Tag Team Racing, the limitations in the DS hardware meant that the game had to be built differently, with far fewer polygons and lower resolution textures. Their aim was to keep it as similar as possible to all other versions. Radical Entertainment, the developer behind the original versions of Tag Team Racing, sent Sensory the required character models for the game. But during the process of reducing the models' polygons, the team at Sensory decided it would look better if they just made their own from scratch. The game was cancelled just a couple months before its due date, with official announcements saying that the release of Mario Kart DS would affect their sales. This was met with distrust. Stories began to circulate about failing leadership at Sensory. An expose about the poor management even came to light in a blog post by an ex-Sensory employee. This alleged mismanagement could have led towards the port's cancellation. Crash Landed and Crash Team Racing, 2010. Also known as I Am Crash Bandicoot, this game was slated for release in 2010 as a reboot to the entire Crash Bandicoot mainline series. Radical Entertainment worked on it for a while. That is, until their parent company, Activision, began to lay off much of its staff in its subsidiary studios. Many of the concepts that Radical originally made are available to see. Despite all the concepts, Radical still didn't have much gameplay to show off, which contributed to its cancellation when they had to show it off to their publisher. The gameplay was going to be linearly focused in an open-world environment, similar to Twinsanity. Crash would be tasked with collecting parts to create wacky gadgets as he progresses, sorta like the power-ups that he wins in the original 3 games. Crash Landed's story was going to revolve around the origins of the Bandicoot himself, focusing on his original mutation by Cortex. Dingodile was also going to have a star role too, returning as a major antagonist. The game was going to release simultaneously with yet another cancelled racing game, titled Crash Team Racing. This was to be developed by a separate studio, High Impact Games. The racing spin-off was in the same style and setting as Crash Landed, but it also never came to fruition. Gabriel Mann and Rebecca Newell were set to be the composers for both of these unreleased games. CTR would have a huge cast of Crash-related characters, with up to 16 racers on one track at a given time. Each character had their own special move, as well as each kart having a customization mechanic, with up to 64 possible combinations. It's easy to see how large the scope was for the cancelled Crash Team Racing. At the time of cancellation, the team only had one completed track, titled Happy Woods. It had music which reused themes from Twinsanity, and was later placed on Nitro Kart 2's Bandicoot Beach track. There is quite a bit of evidence and screenshots regarding this duo of cancellations. Crash and Burn. Bob Raffay was an art director who worked on the original Crash Trilogy. Bob founded his own studio in 2007, named Big Red Button Entertainment, who were responsible for Sonic Boom: Rise of Lyric. Big Red had a habit of uploading previous projects to their website, including a vault section for old demos and prototypes. One of these uploads is a prototype of a Crash game they'd pitched in 2014, a beach-themed jungle level, similar to the opening of the original Crash game is shown in the demo video. Fellow gaming channel Destination Mark contacted Bob Raffay to get some more information about their pitch. Bob replied that Crash and Burn was intended to persuade Activision to give Big Red a contract to develop the 20th anniversary series reboot for the Bandicoots. Activision eventually handed the responsibility to Vicarious Visions, who developed the Insane Trilogy. Crash Bandicoot. PS4 launch title. Shuhei Yoshida, who used to be the president for Sony Interactive, told Edge in an interview that a Crash Bandicoot game could have been on the roster of launch titles with the PS4. He said that the plan was to demonstrate the PS4 being about diverse experiences rather than cutting-edge graphics. The idea of doing a Crash game was thrown in by Mark Cerny. The existing Crash-like game, Knack, was the result of these meetings. Nothing else is known about this possible direction, but it's sure that their marketing message was clear. Unreleased Vicarious Visions game. In 2012, some concept art of Crash Bandicoot surfaced with a new design. The leaker had taken a photo of a poster inside the Vicarious Visions studio. The cancelled game was confirmed by Activision game designer Mike Stout, who said that, quote, "The art was from a cancelled Crash game from a long time ago, but no other details have ever emerged." Twinsanity sequel. In an interview, Keith Webb mentioned some ideas that they'd had in developer meeting rooms regarding a Twinsanity sequel. He'd said that they'd had an idea for levels to take place across various television programs. Crash would be sucked into each level by a portal disguised as a TV, gifted to the Bandicoots by Cortex. Keith said that one of the most fleshed out ideas was the medical drama level, with enemies chasing Crash with big needles. The sequel to Twinsanity never reached full development. Toys for Bob pitch. Hardly anything is known about this pitch. An editor at Crashy News, another Crash fan site, said that Anthony Hahn, an artist for Toys for Bob around 2008, mentioned development of a Crash game, which never materialized. All that's known, likely due to NDAs and legal reasons, is a short sketch of a few Crash characters. There is at least one other cancelled Crash game, but you'll have to watch our episode of every cancelled Spyro game for that. Hint hint, make sure to subscribe and like the video. Join our Discord server, Bound to Game Dev. There's an active community of game lovers and game developers you can chat with right now. Link in the description. Thanks for watching. This has been a GameFAQs special.